Hi there, my name's Patrick Laub. I'm going to, in this recording, go through what it takes to set up a set of lecture slides using Quarto. Now I've started with a brand new machine here, a completely empty Windows box, and I'll go through the process of setting everything up and showing you how to compile and create new lecture slides and push them so that they're public on the web. But just to show you kind of what the final product will look like, it will be a combination of a website which is generated using Quarto, and for each of the lectures there'll be this kind of web view, HTML view, and also a set of slides, and this format is called Reveal.js, and it lets you have this two-dimensional structure of slides, which I find really appealing. And because they're HTML, you can introduce all kinds of interesting animations, or what's another example here, and they will run in the slides as well as in the web version. And Quarto can be also set up to generate just PDFs, static PDFs of each of these as well, which is useful for making annotations. But of course, the downside of that is anything interactive doesn't work anymore. The output becomes flattened, in a sense. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start just by installing the software that we need. Now, the main one is Quarto, and later on, because we'll actually be using GitHub to host the website, we'll need to install Git and things related to GitHub, but I'll come to that later on. And because when Quarto is actually generating the slides, it will read through these .qmd files, which are basically an updated version of the R Markdown syntax. Very simple header at the top, specifying configuration options, and then inside here you can run, say, R code, and then the output, if you want it to be, it'll be run, and then the output will be placed in this part of the document. And so for these slides, I actually do a mixture of R and a little bit of Python, so we'll need to install both of those as well. But I hope that you can see that in terms of this Markdown Quarto syntax, it's very simple. There's really nothing to be afraid of. And the way that I've structured this is that actually this source code is not going to be visible to the public, to the students. It's in a private repository, so that you can update it and you can put notes in there or even answers to quiz questions and whatnot. But the public version, which is actually going to be what is generated inside this docs folder, that will be what is seen to the world. Right? So these will be public so long as anyone can find the website that you're using. So here I'm not really hiding it, but you can hand it to the students and they'll see this, but they won't see the source code. Okay, that's enough of a preamble. I'll get started installing things. So the main ones is the Quarto, Git, Visual Studio Code is what I use to edit these files. And then later on, to do this automatic conversion of a Reveal.js HTML slides into a static PDF. There are built-in ways to do it, but they're a bit clunky and unreliable. I prefer to use Decktape, and so that actually is a little bit more involved in setup, but running it's very simple. So we just need to install this thing called Node.js, and then install Decktape from there. So what I've already done is I've got this folder here, which is all of the Quarto files and everything related to it, all the images we want to show, for example. I've got that downloaded here, and I've also downloaded all these things that we're going to install. So I'll probably fast forward through this section, but basically I'm going to install first the computational side of things, so RStudio to run R, and then to run Python I've got Anaconda. I'll install that. I already installed Google Chrome. It's not necessary, but sometimes the slides that you generate will look a little bit different in different browsers, and Chrome is sort of the most steady one and the most common anyway, so we want to make sure that what we generate works in Chrome. So I already installed that one. And I also installed one called Sublime Merge, which is just the software I use to keep track of Git repositories. Okay, now I'll get started installing those things. Okay, that should be the installations complete. Most were very straightforward, just pressing next all the time. Anaconda took a very long time to install, as always, because it comes with many of the common Python data science packages and installs them directly, so they take a long time to get set up. Whereas for R, we just get the language, and we'll need to manually install the packages that we need. So in that case, we can get started actually. If we I made a R project that just covers this folder. So we have opening R for the first time. So here we can see all of the Quarto code, the .qmd files inside each different folder for each week, for example. And we can see that RStudio has noticed that we're using packages, right, that we haven't installed yet. There are no packages on this brand new installation. So whenever I'm adding new packages to my project here, I just keep track of them in a file called, if I can find it, yeah, there it is, R requirements. So I know that I'm teaching a data science course, statistics and machine learning, so I'll need a lot of these specific data sets, so I might as well just basically run this whole file to install them all. Okay, that seems to have installed them all. Now I just wanted to emphasize that this is not required to get Quarto running or anything like that. This is just because my specific project is generating slides and showing off, for example, GLMs and random forests. So I needed to install these packages because the Quarto files that I wrote actually rely on them. Okay, now it's possible to sort of stop here. For example, I can use RStudio. This is probably one of the recommended ways from the RStudio devs, from the Quarto developers, is just to use RStudio directly, right? And you can have a big button here that says render the current document, and it will take, say, my introduction, lecture slides, and generate them directly. Now, at the same time as well, you can view the Quarto code using this visual editor. So instead of seeing markdown syntax, we'll see a little bit more closer to what the actual output looks like. So I don't typically do this, and it actually changes the underlying markdown when you turn this on, which is a little disappointing. But now we can see that this is a bit more processed version of the original Quarto code, and you can start editing directly in here if you prefer that. I'm not going to actually do it this way though. I prefer to do it using Visual Studio Code, not having this visual mode, just having it just reading the source code directly, and then you can activate Quarto from the command line, and that's just my personal preference. But so you don't have to do that exactly the same way. So to open it up in Visual Studio Code, we can do it, open it directly, or I believe when I installed it, I added the context option here. We can just right click and go open with code. Yes, I trust the folder. Updates are disabled. Okay. Mark is done. So for example, if we open up introduction.qmd, that we're not getting any syntax highlighting just now, and I kind of expected VS Code normally pops up saying, oh, I know you're trying to open this file, let's add an extension for it. So let's just do that manually. Extensions, search for Quarto, and install that one. Okay, done. Now we have the syntax highlighting for Quarto code. And then, so this is just how I prefer to edit it directly like this. To compile the code, what I'll do is I'll just use the Quarto from the command line. So in this case, I can type Quarto render, and then here I'm in the top level folder. In this introduction file, if I just want to render that one file, is in the M1 introduction subdirectory, and then introduction.qmd. Let's see if that works. So what you see is progress going through as it takes the chunks of code that I built into the markdown and runs them one by one. Okay, it's finally realized that we have some R code, so might as well install that extension as well. And it generates, depending on if you're using R or Python or both together, for R it generates a knitter file, which is then turned into the two different output formats that we've specified. So here that's HTML, and then it goes through the same file a second time to generate the slides using reveal.js. Now where did they go? With this package, that is specified by the top level configuration file for this whole project. So this whole project is specified in _quarto.yaml, and it tells lots of interesting things here, but basically if I scroll down, it says which format we're going to, by default, render all these files. So at the top here, we have YAML configuration that's specific to this one file, and then unless we overwrite it, we'll also get the default, which is specified for the whole project. That is, by default, each of these Quarto files will be generating HTML and reveal.js. And it will have, the reveal.js will have this common subtitle, for example. It'll have a common logo, all these other little details here, just to keep consistency. And if you wanted to, you could, for example, use other formats like Beamer, PDF directly. There might be some others that I've forgotten. Okay, that doesn't answer the question. So it's for the overall project, since I've specified output directory as docs, that means every time I rendered, yes, whatever. Every time I render in the subdirectory docs, we'll see these files being updated. So we just rendered M1 introduction, so that has a newer update time. And the main files are these ones here, the top level HTML, which we can just open by double clicking. So it generated this page, basically, and the slides as well, which is the Reveal.js version of the slides. So that's, okay, need to reopen, yeah. Okay, so when I ran that code, it generated those two files and then hit an error. Now that's because this setup, I also, inside the Quarto.yaml, I added this configuration that says every time you render, run this script. And that basically is using that Decktape software to convert the slides into a PDF. So, for example, if you notice here, this PDF version of the slides. So this is what should have been generated automatically just now, but it wasn't, if we look at the date times. So we might as well get that working. Earlier, I installed Node.js. So if we open up command prompt, then because we installed Node.js, we have access to this command now. npm stands for Node Package Manager. And that's what we need to install Decktape. So we basically just copy this command. Come back. Okay, that didn't work. npm install -g globally Decktape. Okay, I somehow have two greater than symbol in there by mistake. Okay, so Decktape should now be installed. Right, so Decktape. This is the latest version right now. And if we rerun that, it probably won't work immediately because we just installed it. So I'll just quickly reopen Visual Studio Code. And if I just rerun that same command, it will go through that process again, render the HTML, render the Reveal.js output, and then after it's finished sort of the normal Quarto part, we'll do this post-render step, which is this, let's just open that up, scripts, Decktape, PDFs. So this is just a short file that I made. You don't need to go understand it at all really, but basically it looks at what we just changed, and it will grab the slides HTML version and then call Decktape to convert it to a PDF. So that, while I was talking, that just happened. So it took Quarto finished, and then here just our script printed out what it was doing. It was grabbing the slides, creating a PDF, and then it found Decktape automatically, and it opened up, well, there's no point going into the details, but it generates the PDF for us. And so that's what one of these files is. Let me just change the options. Okay, that's what this latest PDF is. So it was just generated, and it's the PDF version of the slides. Okay, so that's producing an update to one particular slide, 1 week of content, and it's possible to, here, if I just go back to the command line, if I don't specify, well, okay, I won't go that far. Let's say if I just specify the folder, then what it will do, it will, and I hit render, it will go in and find all the Quarto files in that folder. So here actually each week we have the lecture slides, introduction.qmd, but also the labs as well. So lab introduction-lab, so we'll try to compile that as well. Okay, so it seems like I missed one of these packages as well. Let me just install that quickly. So I tried that again. But notice that here, okay, I'll scroll back. It's found 2 different Quarto files to render. The first one is the lab, and then it will go through all of the code chunks in there one by one and generate them. And actually, the labs, what I've chosen is, because they're not lecture slides, I'm overwriting the format. And so the top level Quarto file specifies, the default that each Quarto file in this project will be a combination of HTML and slides, reveal.js. But for each of the labs, I just overrode that default by saying, okay, we don't actually want slides, that's too much work for just labs. So just make HTML and PDF directly, and some other special configuration. Okay, if we check the output, okay, so by default, the PDF option here in Quarto, it actually generates a LaTeX file and then compiles the LaTeX file. So I didn't install LaTeX, and even if I had installed it, Quarto doesn't use it by default, I don't believe. But you can tell Quarto that, okay, I'm going to need some tech. I want to be able to use tech, like LaTeX outputs. So if you just say Quarto install TinyTeX, we'll get a very basic version of tech that Quarto is happy to use, and Quarto can keep it updated. So it's the simplest solution here. Okay, I'm trying to re-render that folder. It should be able to generate the LaTeX file, then compile the LaTeX file to a PDF. And we'll see it pop up here in the docs m1 introduction subdirectory once it's all finished. Okay, so we've got the updated HTML and PDF here for the lab, the website and the slides, and now the post-render script is kicking in to just convert the slides into a PDF version again. So the newly generated files of the labs, which are pretty basic, and then also here, because we generated them together, we can say other format, and we'll see the PDF that was generated too, the introduction-lab.pdf. And if you can sort of notice, it looks exactly like what you would expect from a LaTeX file, because that's how it was generated under the hood. But it's a bit nicer than LaTeX because it's so easy to include code and to include the outputs of code as well. Okay, so that's what happens when you type Quarto render for a file, for a folder. And if you don't specify anything, you just say Quarto render from this root directory, then it will just go through the whole project and compile everything. So that takes a little while. I might just to show you that this is even working, I'm going to change the code here a little bit. So here the lecturers need to be changed. Let me just grab. So Andres and I taught this course last year. But next time it'll be Patrick Wong by himself, and then after that, Patrick Wong and myself, Patrick Laub. So let's just fix up that introduction slide. Now, just to see that this works, Patrick Wong. So Andres won't be there anymore, it'll be Patrick Wong.jpg. This syntax here is just how you include a photo, but then let me just check the output quickly. Yeah, okay, so then we'll say Patrick Wong, LIC for 3142, Patrick Laub, LIC for 5110. Now if we look currently in the output file here, so in the introduction file we have the old version, right? Now if we Quarto render m1 introduction.qmd, I can say if I want to just update the HTML version, I can run --2 HTML. Okay, sorry, I'll just cancel that. I need to save the file first, and then --2 HTML, and it should update just that one format. It won't do it twice. Okay, now here is the version. Maybe if I show you from here, from the docs, just updated. So we've got the new file that's been. It was. Okay, this is a little bit important. Let me just show you. So the way that it's set up is that everything that Quarto needs to create the file is in the M1 introduction folder. So that's why we have the Quarto files themselves, and any photos, for example, or any textbook figures, animations here that it needs to generate the output. And then when it generates the output, it copies the output only to the docs folder. So if we notice the Quarto files, the introduction.qmd, that doesn't exist over here in the docs folder, because the docs folder will be made public, and we don't actually want to publish the source code there. We just want the actual output, which is these PDFs in HTML. And because we need Patrick's photo to compile it, Quarto noticed that we're using this folder and this file, and automatically made a copy in the docs folder. Okay, so if we open that up, we can see we've updated Patrick Wong here, and so the update has worked. We rendered correctly, and we can check locally changes that we've made, but we didn't notice. If we look at the original web version, nothing's changed on the website, right? We still have the old photos. Now that's because we can make all the changes we want locally. We can add new files, fix errors, add new slides, but it won't be visible to anybody except ourselves until we tell GitHub that we made some changes. So let me just, because the very next time Patrick's teaching, Patrick Wong that is, he's teaching without me, so he's actually doing all these weeks. So I'm going to remove myself from this temporarily, which is quite easy. So we don't need multiple columns, just delete all of this, basically. And I don't want to just render the HTML, I want the PDF version as well and everything, so I'll just render the introduction. And while that's going, I'm going to open Sublime Merge. Now that's my preferred way of viewing changes in Git. And if we open it up here, open the whole folder, we can quickly see what has changed between what we have locally and what is publicly showing, which is on GitHub. So we can see the history of all the past changes in this project too. So these are things that I've changed recently, and I've added a little comment to say what I changed. This is most useful when, for example, last year, Andres and I were both editing this file, this sharing sort of co-ownership of this whole project, and so we can sort of communicate with each other and not, accidentally delete each other's changes. So Git is wonderful for that. And here I've made changes locally which aren't in a commit, and Sublime Merge can show me what's changed when I go over to this modified file section. If I click on the introduction.qmd, I can see this is what I changed here, right? I deleted most of this text and added Patrick Wong's image in. Now I'm going to say that I want this to be updated on the public website, so I want to keep this here, and in Sublime Merge I staged the commit, although it could be done in Visual Studio Code itself. Let me just open it up here in source control. It shows you the same information, so the changes, what's changed. And if I double click introduction, we can see it's noticed that this is what we had before, this is what we have now. So you can follow through on Visual Studio Code directly. I paid for the software, but you don't need to pay for it. It's currently, this is the unregistered version, unpaid version. And the Git terminology is I want to stage this file. I want to tell Git this is one that I'm probably going to keep as a new commit. And there's a lot of changes here in the docs folder as well. So if we notice, if we just change this code and then push that to GitHub, the slides themselves won't change actually. The publicly available slides, because they're only reflecting what's in this docs folder. So here is just updating the source code, and then pretty much everything else that changed in the docs folder is what we want to keep. Many of these changes, frankly, are not very important. For example, if I generate the lab file on one computer and then I generate it again on a different computer, these sort of temporary files that R creates when it runs the code might be slightly different. So here it's replaced this image on the left with the one on the right, which is, well, indistinguishable to me, but the metadata of the file has changed slightly, or the way that R generates these box plots on Linux is slightly different to how it generates them on a Mac, and slightly different to on Windows, or even two different Windows machines. So it's a little bit wasteful to keep including those changes, but we'll do it here anyway. The main one here is we're changing is that the slides themselves have Patrick Wong's image in it. So this is the HTML output that was generated. And same for the slides.html, that's the lecture slides. PDF doesn't show you exactly what changed, it's just a binary format. So we know something changed there. And then all of these look It's well, a bit too detailed to go into all of them, but basically we want to keep everything that's changed. We want to stage them. But here there's also another slightly tricky thing to keep in mind, because here we're looking at files that Git already knew about and that we changed. So in fact, there are files that Git doesn't know about. So there are many in my folder. So some of these are notes to myself, or things that are maybe images that I thought that I would need, but I didn't end up using in slides. So these just live in the untracked files section. But in fact, there are two that are important, right? We added Patrick's photo, so we actually need to tell Git about that. We stage that new file, and then also here. So as I said, for it to be shown publicly, we need to add the version that Quarto automatically copied over to the docs folder, and we add that as well. And then once we've got all that, we're ready to make a commit. Actually, haven't set up Git on this fake computer, so I don't think it'll work straight away. Well, let's just see. Add Patrick Wong's photo to introduction lecture. Okay. Okay, so now I've made the commit. Git knows that I want to make these changes, that these specific changes are packaged together, and it's on the main branch, which is the, well, that's a totally different topic I won't go into, but the main difference here is origin main or main, and that is main represents what my computer locally can see, and origin main represents what GitHub knows about, the public version that's hosting the website. So to update GitHub itself, we need to push. This won't work. I don't think this will work there, but we'll see what happens. So if we push, okay, it doesn't. It asks if this is really GitHub. I guess technically someone could be faking that they're GitHub. And then we'll be denied, right? Because this is this GitHub repository only has a few different owners, and it doesn't know that I'm actually one of the owners of this repository, so it doesn't know that I should be allowed to commit here. There's probably easier ways to do this, but when I set up a new computer, I always just do the same thing. So I go to my settings, and I add a new SSH key here. Now, I just give it a name, so this is, I give it the name of the computer that I'm working from, and what I need to do is copy an SSH key that's sort of like a password. Now how am I going to do that? So I installed Git earlier. If I open up Git bash. Okay. If I type SSH keygen. Yeah, okay, it will create a new file, enter file. That seems fine. If I want a password, I can put it in. I don't normally bother. And I get some bizarre alien language output. Now what just happened here is inside this folder, if I go back to the home directory here, I can find a new folder that's been made, .sh, and this is a pair of files. So it's using public-private key cryptography. So if I want to tell some to verify who I am, I can take this .public file and share that with someone, if I can get it to open. Okay, so I can copy this bizarre string and tell GitHub about it. Okay, now that I've added that to my account, hopefully I can push. Okay, that works. Now, the changes we made locally, we put them into a commit, and then we told GitHub that we made the change. So if I refresh this page, the last commit was 4 days ago. But now we can see that it noticed the commit that we put in 5 minutes ago. And we can go in and take a look at what changed and check that it's all working. Now, that will update the public website here, but if I try to refresh it straight away, we won't see it immediately. Right? And that's because of this little dot here. So what happens is that GitHub, we've set up this repository to use GitHub Pages, and it will automatically run some script to put the website together and tell the right GitHub computers about the new website that it needs updating. And if we're really impatient, we can sit here and watch these, they're called GitHub Actions, slowly finish up. And once this deploying to GitHub Pages is done, then the website, public-facing version of the website, will have been completely updated. And again, if we hit refresh, it might not work straight away. Let's just try. No, it did. Okay. So it updated the public version this time, but because the site may have been cached, because each website doesn't change that much, Chrome might not have actually gone and asked for the latest version. It might just have kept the old version and shown it back to us. You can really force it to not do that by opening up this developer view with the inspect, right-clicking the refresh button and go empty cache or hard reload. Both of those options really will tell you whether you've got the latest version. Now we've made an update. Hopefully this is updated as well on the slides. I didn't actually check. I should have checked this before pushing. Yeah, it worked, but this photo is not a great aspect ratio. Probably need to make the photo a little bit narrower to fit on the slides properly. But also we have, I didn't check this either, but hopefully the PDF version updated too. And yes, it did. Perfect. Yeah, so that's the basics of it. Actually, now I think about it, the only other thing I'll do is just reopen Visual Studio Code and just do a render of the whole project, just to make sure there's no other potential problems in here, that things haven't been installed or set up properly. and there are 21 files in total, including each of the different labs, each of the lecture slides. Some of them have multiple labs for that week, week 1 doesn't really have a great deal of code in it, but for example, I know that this week has a little bit of Python and R, so maybe something will crash here. This one is actually quite slow to run. This lab, it's doing quite a big analysis using PCA on some large data set, and that's probably another thing to note, that let me just check. Yeah, okay. So because that's so slow, and sometimes you're just trying to update the whole course materials in one hit, and you don't really need to change any of the code. For example, if this code hasn't changed, you haven't changed anything in the source code, so you don't really need to run this code again to get a new output. And because of that, somewhere in the configuration I turned on this option where actually I can probably find it, PCA lab. Yeah, so here, because I knew that this PCA lab takes a long time, I added this extra freeze option, and that means that unless we actually actively go in here and change the code, the source code, and re-render it, unless we change something, it won't actually rerun the code. Actually, it will keep the output in this _freeze folder. We don't need to ever go in there, but it will keep a copy of the last time it was run there, and then it won't bother rerunning it. It will just, keep the output, copy it to the output here, the HTML. So it can make this whole process a lot faster. Had a problem immediately. Let's just try that again. And that's another thing worth noting. If you had Dropbox installed, there is one slightly frustrating thing that can happen. So when these files are being generated, they are generated first in the same folder as the source file, the Quarto file. For example, here we have linear regression, slides, and so on. And then once it's finished rendering, it will move them from here over to the docs folder when everything has been everything ran without a problem, basically. Now that can be a little bit frustrating if you have Dropbox running and it's syncing. It sees these new files. This happens pretty frequently on Windows. It sees these new files. It says, okay, I better start uploading them. And when it's uploading them, it keeps ownership of the files temporarily while it's uploading them. So then when Quarto is actually finished rendering and it tries to move them over to the docs folder, it doesn't have ownership of them anymore. So what's happened is that when it tries to move it, it fails and the whole process crashes. And I don't know any way around it other than just to disable Dropbox syncing, for half an hour or an hour when you're doing this on Windows. And another thing that worth noting, so when you render the whole website like this, just type Quarto render with no, not specifying any particular week or anything, then the whole docs folder gets wiped out and everything gets regenerated. And sometimes there are some files that we just want to be public, that aren't really related to Quarto at all. So, for example, I had a demo which was just a website about splines, and it's completely outside of the Quarto system. It was made using Julia, Pluto notebooks, and so it's nothing to do with Quarto. But every time I render the whole project, I want it to be somewhere publicly available. So because I listed it here in the resources directory, it just means that these are files that once you've finished rendering all the Quarto stuff, just copy these over to the output. Now, if I can demonstrate that these are sort of hidden. Well, if you have links to it, they're not hidden, but that's where that file should be on the public version, right? Which is just a sequence of sort of a demo notebook interactive to do with splines in this case. Okay, so I'll just let this run. Hopefully there are no future problems. I'm not sure why it didn't run last time, but you know, computers aren't perfect. Okay, so the whole project rendered. And we can see that by all these modified files in the docs output for every week. It did crash on the converting the slides to HTML. Nope. Yeah, that crashed too. Well, I better stop this recording here in case everything crashes and I lose the recording, but basically that's the long and short of generating, updating and pushing a Quarto generated website with labs and slides and PDFs of the slides and with interactive components, and it may seem quite intimidating just looking at this large video and all the steps involved, but in fact it's really quite straightforward once you get in the hang of it, and you make small changes and you can unlock a lot of what Quarto is capable of doing. So Quarto, the website itself is fantastic for showing you all the things you can do. And the amount of detail that are in here is just phenomenal, with great examples. So I'm really quite impressed and thankful for the Quarto team who put this all together. Okay, thanks very much.